the Teenage Brain Masterclass. Welcome to the Fresh Thinking School of Brain Science, where we curate the best content to inspire and equip you to be the very best person ever. Do you have a teenager at home? Everyone with a teenager at some point will have a story to tell. Most dramatic, with tears of pain and sometimes tears of wonder. The masterclass is inspired by Dr. Francis E. Jensen's parental psychology book, The Teenage Brain, a neuroscientist survival guide to raising adolescents and young adults, published in 2014. Dr. Jensen is a neurologist who currently serves as professor of neurology and chair of neurology at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. What is the central idea of the teenage brain? The masterclass centers on uncovering the mysteries of the teenage brain and how parents can better communicate with their adolescent children. 5 critical questions are the core of this masterclass. The first question is, what is the teenage brain? Number 2, how does the teenage brain differ from the brain of adults? Number 3, how does the teenage brain work? The next one is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the teenage brain? And then, how can we as adults relate to and cultivate the teenage brain rather than dismissing it? What is the teenage brain? For a while, scientists believed incorrectly, as it turned out, that brain growth was pretty much complete by the time a child started kindergarten. This is why, for the past 2 decades, parents of infants and toddlers trying to jump or to get a jump on their children's education have inundated their kids with learning tools and accessories like Baby Einstein, DVDs, and Baby Mozart discovery kits. But the adolescent brain, well, most people thought it was like adults with fewer miles or kilometers on it. The teenage brain is sensitive to rewards, which new studies show can aid decision making. The underdevelopment of the teenage brain prevents teenagers from taking the time to make logical decisions or learn from past mistakes. In teens' brains, the connections between the emotional part of the brain and the decision-making center are still developing, and not always at the same rate. That is why when teens have overwhelming emotional impact, they can't explain later what they were thinking. They weren't thinking as much as they were feeling. The idea of adolescence as a general period of human development has been around for centuries. Still, as a discrete period between childhood and adulthood, it can be traced only as far as the middle of the 20th century. 2 things in the decade spanning the middle of the 20th century: the Great Depression and the rise of high schools, not only changed attitudes about the meaning of childhood, but also helped to usher in the era of the teenager. Understanding the teen brain. Good judgment isn't something teenagers can excel in, at least not yet. The rational part of a teen's brain isn't fully developed and won't be until the age of 25 or so. Recent research has found that adult and teen brains work differently. Adults think with prefrontal cortex, the brain's Rational part. This part of the brain responds to situations with good judgment and an awareness of long-term consequences. Teens process information with the amygdala. This is the emotional part. In teens' brains, the connections between the emotional part of the brain and decision-making center are still developing and not always at the same rate. That is why when teens have overwhelming emotional input, they can't explain later what they were thinking. They weren't thinking as much as they were feeling. How does the teenage brain work? Well, the teen brain has many plasticities, which means it can change, adapt, and respond to its environment. Challenging academics or mental activities, exercises, and creative activities such as art can help the brain mature and learn. What time does the teenage brain start working? Well, simply put, a teenager's brain is not ready to learn at 6 a.m. That is why it is typical for teenagers to sleep late on weekends. Their brain's development time does not start until 10 or 11 in the morning. Adolescents have more reward center activation when learning a new task than adults. This greater activation helps teenagers learn from the environment more adaptively and efficiently than adults. It is kind of surprising results. For example, pictures of the brain in action show that adolescents' brain work differently than adults when they make decisions or solve problems. Their actions are guided more by the emotional and reactive amygdala and less by the thoughtful logical frontal cortex. Adolescent brain development is characterized by an imbalance between the limbic and reward system, which mature earlier, and the not yet fully mature prefrontal control system. This imbalance may be the neural substrate for the typical emotional reactive style of adolescence and may promote risky behavior. Other misconceptions and myths about the teenage brain and teenage behavior are now so ingrained they are accepted social beliefs. For example, teenagers are impulsive and emotional because of surging hormones. Teenagers are rebellious and oppositional because they want to be complex and difficult. And if teenagers occasionally drink too much alcohol without their parents' consent, well, their brains are resilient, so they will undoubtedly rebound without suffering any permanent effects. Well, another assumption is that the die is cast at puberty. Whatever your IQ or apparent talents, you stay that way for the rest of your life. Again, all wrong. The teen brain is at an exceptional point in development. Well, evidence suggests otherwise. Evidence suggests that children's brains continue to be molded by their environment physiologically well past their mid 20s. So, in addition to being a time of great promise, adolescence is also a time of unique hazards. Children learn what is appropriate and what is not, when to go to bed, when to get up in the morning, what not to touch, and where not to go. They learn the importance of school and of being polite to their elders. When they are physically hurt or emotionally wounded, they come to us seeking solace. So, what happens when they reach 14, 15, or 16 years old? How is it that the cute, even tempered, happy, and well-behaved child you have known for over a decade is suddenly someone you don't know? Well, the human body is impressive. It neatly tucks all these complex organs into this finite space and connects them into one smoothly functioning system. Even the average human brain is said by many scientists to be the most complex object in the universe. For example, a baby's brain is not just a tiny adult brain and brain growth, unlike most other organs in the body. It's not simply a process of getting more prominent. Instead, the brain changes as it grows, going through special stages that take advantage of the childhood years, and the protection of the family. Then, towards the end of the teen years, the surge towards independence. Childhood and teen brains are impressionable for a good reason. Just as baby cheeks can imprint on the mother hen, human children and teens can imprint on their experiences, influencing what they choose to do as adults. If the human brain is very much a puzzle, then the teenage brain is a puzzle awaiting completion. The brain of an adolescent is nothing short of a paradox. It has an overabundance of gray matter, the neurons that form the brain's basic building blocks. An undersupply of white matter is why the teenage brain is almost like a brand new Ferrari. It is primed and pumped but hasn't been road tested yet. In other words, it is all revved up but doesn't quite know where to go. This paradox has led to a kind of mixed cultural message. We assume that when someone looks like an adult, he or she must be one mentally. Of course, adolescent boys shave and teenage girls can get pregnant. Yet, neurologically, neither one has a brain ready for prime time, the adult world. The brain was essentially built by nature from the ground up, from the cellar to the attic, back to front. Remarkably, the brain also wires itself, starting in the back with the structures that mediate our interaction with the environment. The brain regulates our sensory processes, which are vision, hearing, balance, touch, and a sense of space. The mediating brain structures include the cerebellum, which aids balance and coordination. The thalamus is the relay station for sensory signals. The hypothalamus is a central command center for maintaining body functions, including hunger, thirst, sex, and aggression. At 3 pounds, this wet, wrinkled tissue is about the size of two fists held next to each other and weighs no more than large acorn squash. The gray matter houses most of the principal brain cells called neurons. These are the cells responsible for thought, perception, motion, and control of bodily functions. These cells also need to connect and the spinal cord for the brain to control our body's behavior, thoughts, and also emotions. Neurons send most of their connections to other neurons through the white matter in the brain. The commonly used brain imaging tool, magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, beautifully distinguishes between gray and white matter. On the outside surface, the brain has a rippled structure. The size of the human brain does have a lot to do with the size of the human skull. The brain has to fit inside the skull. The size of the human brain does have a lot to do with the size of the human skull the brain has to fit inside the skull. The brain is divided into specialized regions for each of the senses. The area for hearing or the auditory cortex is in the temporal lobes. The visual cortex is in the occipital lobes, and the parietal lobes house movement and feelings in the motor and sensory cortexes respectively. Other parts of the brain have nothing to do with the senses. The best example of this is the frontal lobes, which make up more than 40% of the human brain's total volume, more than in any other animal species. The frontal lobes are the seat of our ability to generate insight, judgment, abstraction, and planning. They are the source of self-awareness and our ability to assess dangers and risks. So we use this area of the brain to choose a course of action wisely. Accordingly, the frontal lobes are often said to house the executive function of the human brain. A chimpanzee's frontal lobes come closest to the humans in size but still make up only 17% of its total brain volume. A dog's frontal lobes make up just 7% of its brain. For other species, different brain structures are more important. Compared with humans, monkeys and chimpanzees have a much larger cerebellum where control of physical coordination is honed. For example, a dolphin's auditory cortex is more advanced than a human's, with a hearing range at least 7 times that of a young adult. A dog has 1 billion olfactory cells in its brain compared with our measly 12 million. We humans do not have much else going for us other than our wile and wit. Our competitive edge is our ingenuity. Brains over brawn. This edge takes the longest time to develop as the connectivity to and from the frontal lobes is the most complex and the last to fully mature. This executive function thus develops slowly. We are not born with it. So, in what order are these brain regions all connected during childhood and adolescence? This could never have been learned before the advent of modern brain imaging. New forms of brain scans called magnetic resonance imaging (MRI) can give us accurate pictures of the brain inside the skull and show connections between different regions. Even better, a new kind of MRI called the functional MRI, abbreviated fMRI, can show us what brain areas turn one another on. So we can see if fire areas and wired together. In the last decade, the National Institute of Health conducted a major study to examine how brain regions activate one another over the first 21 years of life. Scientists and psychologists have long known that there are differences in development between girls and boys, and that girls' language development, specifically reading and writing, are generally about 1 to 1.5 years ahead of boys. As parents of teenagers, you are all probably nodding your heads right now. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. What you may not know is that these differences cannot all be laid at the feet of a difference in the speed of development. Why? Because there indeed are anatomical and physiological differences between an adolescent girl's brain and an adolescent boy's brain. However, the fact that there are differences in neural anatomy between the two sexes is undisputed. The differences are present in early fetal life as the hormones have already altered the destiny of brain regions set up to go either way in the embryo. This is called sexual dimorphism. And one region that is heavily altered by early differences in levels of the female hormone estrogen or the male hormone testosterone, hypothalamus. Now, the teenage brain masterclass, in our view, offers insights into the complex and unique neurology of the adolescent brain, suggesting how we may use this knowledge to better engage with teenagers. Adolescence is a stressful period. Although we often blame hormones for questionable teenage behavior, hormones are only part of the equation. The problem is that teenagers are experiencing hormone surges for the first time, and their brains don't yet understand how to respond to these changes. Adults have similar hormone levels to teenagers, and yet they behave differently. This is because their brains have adapted to biological and chemical changes. Teenage brains are quicker, more flexible, and more adventurous than adults. The activity in the limbic part of the brain, the part of the brain seeking new adventures and novelty, surges during adolescence. Teenagers make reckless decisions because this limbic system often dominates them. Parents should remember that teenagers are always looking for new experiences. Our job as adults and parents is to keep them safe and steer them in the right direction. Recent studies show that significant neurological changes occur when well into adulthood. The frontal and prefrontal lobes take a long time to fully mature. These are the brain parts responsible for the decision making, personality, judgment, reasoning, and impulse control. Teenage brains have immature frontal and prefrontal lobes, meaning they are often incapable of making the same rational decisions as adults. Teenagers have a reputation for sleeping late and being lazy. There are biological reasons for this behavior. Teenagers release hormones at different times of the day from adults, affecting when they fall asleep and when they wake up. We should stop punishing teenagers for sleeping on weekends and encourage them to get the rest they need. Their brains, of course, are processing all the intensive learning they have experienced each day. We must model the behavior we want from teenagers. Since teenagers are so open to learning, this is a chance to teach them positive, rational, and safe behavioral patterns. Teenagers are more likely to experiment with sex, drugs, and alcohol. Still, these stimulants have a lasting effect on the adolescent brain. We should talk to teenagers and encourage them to approach us with their problems, including substance abuse. If we want respect from teenagers, we should show them the same in return. Teenagers are not a different species. They are simply a work in progress. It can often seem like teenagers are using technology and the internet for much of their day. It is hard to know where the line falls between safe, rewarding use and overuse of technology. There is no turning back from the digital world we all live in. But we can turn away, if even for a few hours or minutes a day. And the earlier we start doing this with our kids, the better. Young people are often exposed to an astonishing number of electronic distractions. They are therefore susceptible to a whole new host of influences. Technology is another opportunity for novelty seeking. Because a teenager's brain is so easy to stimulate, all it takes is the latest digital toy to tease it into distraction. The cascade of neural processes that kicks off the brain's reward circuitry. The rush of the pleasure chemical dopamine can be triggered just as easily by the release of the latest iPhone as by alcohol, pot, sex, or even fast cars. In some ways, technology is a drug. For example, there is increasing evidence of excessive internet usage's effect on adolescents' moods. For example, several studies have shown a connection between depression, poor academic performance, and the inability to curb online time. In any case, increasing numbers of the internet overusers describe themselves as addicts and even seek professional help. What then must be done? Limiting a teenager's internet use is not easy. Still, moving the computer out of your high schooler's bedroom is one way to control it better, and into a common area where you can check more readily on what your son or daughter is up to. Software programs can help you as guardians to monitor what sites your teenagers visit and block access to others. Still, the primary responsibility is for you to communicate with your teenagers. Familiarize yourself with what teenagers do online, what sites tempt them the most, and when. For instance, during math, homework, or when they are supposed to be getting ready for bed. Try to approach the problem not as something the teenagers is being punished for, but as something they need with to stay balanced, well-rounded, and less isolated. Believe it or not, even some tech executives are beginning to realize that digital accessibility may not always be a good thing. The human brain is not fully developed by the time a person reaches puberty. Between the ages of 10 and 25, the brain undergoes changes that have important implications for behavior. The brain reaches 90% of its adult size by the time a person is 6 or 7 years of age. Thus, the brain does not grow in size much during adolescence. However, the crises in the brain continue to become more complex until the late teens. The most significant changes in the brain's folds during this time occur in the part of the cortex that process cognitive and emotional information. Up until puberty, brain cells continue to bloom in the frontal region. Some of the most developmentally significant changes in the brain occur in the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in decision making, cognitive control, and other higher cognitive functions. During adolescence, myelination and synaptic pruning in the prefrontal cortex increases, improving the efficiency of information processing, and neural connections between the prefrontal cortex and other brain regions are strengthened. However, this growth takes time, and the growth is uneven. What are the advantages of a teenage brain. Compared to adults, adolescents have more reward center activation when they are learning a new task. This greater activation helps them learn from the environment more adaptively and efficiently than adults. The adolescent brain has an enhanced need for peer connectedness and new friendships. The downside of this is that teens can feel isolated from adults when they surround themselves only with other teens, also without adult supervision. There is an increase in risky behavior and also impulsivity. What are the disadvantages of a teenage brain? Some research suggests growing up in a disadvantaged neighborhood may adversely affect children's brain development. But for males, at least, positive parenting negated these adverse effects, providing some suitable parenting lessons. Living in a disadvantaged neighborhood can cause stress and has been linked with psychological and social problems in children and also adolescents. The teenage brain has an enhanced need for peer connectedness and new friendship. The downside is that teenagers can feel isolated from adults when they surround themselves only with other teenagers. Also, without adult supervision, there is an increase in risky behavior and impulsivity. Differences between teenage brains by gender. The question is there a gender difference? Most of the variations in brain structure between males and females are minimal and relative to difference in average body size between men and women. Others do not correlate with any specific advantage or disadvantage. The most consistent sex difference in brain morphometry is the 9 to 12% larger brain size reported in males. Individual brain regions most consistently reported as different in males and females include the basal ganglia, hippocampus, and the amygdala. Studies have reported sex difference in brain activation levels in the presence of equal cognitive ability. Some have suggested that at least in adulthood, females tend to have more bilateral activity during tasks and males have more regional activation. There is a biological explanation for this difference. Studies have shown that brains continue to mature and develop throughout childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood. As part of your continuing education program, reflect on the following questions. What are the 3 key lessons you learned from this masterclass? How do you plan to implement what you learned in your profession? What are the 3 specific actions you plan to take in the next 24 hours? Signing off, Dr. Masasekani Mishakosa, Director of the Fresh Thinking School of Brain Science, the Thinking Futurist. Thank you.